Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Stay tuned to see what happens next. Mark walked back to his small apartment that night, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. The rain had stopped, but the cool air still clung to his skin as he passed through the empty streets. His mind was racing, trying to process everything. He had signed a contract to marry a woman he barely knew, a woman who had promised to solve his financial problems in exchange for his name. His heart still beat erratically, unsure of what to feel. The relief was there, yes, but it was overshadowed by doubt. He couldn't help but think, how had he ended up here? As he reached the doorstep of his apartment, he stopped for a moment. The thought of his mother, ill and struggling, pushed him to make this decision. There was no other choice. If he could fix everything, his debts, his future, his family's survival, then maybe, just maybe, it would all be worth it. He opened the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind him. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He sank into the worn couch, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for some answer that wouldn't come. The next morning, Mark stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie. He wasn't used to these kinds of clothes, the sharp suit, the polished shoes. His reflection felt like someone else, someone he didn't recognize. The man who signed that contract the night before felt distant, almost like a stranger. He took a deep breath and ran his fingers through his hair, brushing away the nervousness that threatened to rise. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. "Mr. Davis, it's time," a voice said from the other side. Mark opened the door to find a sleek black car waiting outside. The driver, a well-dressed man with a professional smile, led him to the car. The ride to Eleanor's mansion was silent, the sleek vehicle gliding smoothly through the streets. Mark couldn't help but feel out of place. He had never been in a car like this, never lived in a world like this. But today, it was his world now. As the mansion came into view, Mark's heart skipped a beat. The massive estate stood like a monument to wealth, its towering columns and sprawling grounds giving it a cold, imposing feel. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't his life. This was someone else's world. He stepped out of the car, his shoes clicking against the paved driveway, and followed the driver inside. "Welcome, Mr. Davis," Eleanor's voice rang out from the grand foyer as he entered. She was standing by the staircase, dressed in an elegant gown that only someone with her status could pull off. Her silver hair gleamed in the light, and her presence was as commanding as ever. Mark felt the weight of the mansion pressing down on him, and for a brief moment, he almost wanted to turn around and leave. "This way, please," Eleanor said, motioning for him to follow. Mark walked with her down a long hallway lined with antique paintings and sculptures. The mansion seemed endless, every room more lavish than the last. Eleanor led him to a study, a room filled with dark wood furniture and bookshelves that reached to the ceiling. A large desk sat in the center, and she gestured for him to sit across from her. "I trust your ride was comfortable?" she asked, taking a seat behind the desk. Mark nodded, trying to steady his nerves. "Yes, thank you." Eleanor studied him for a moment before speaking again. "This is just a formality, Mr. Davis. Our marriage will be nothing more than a contract. There will be no emotional involvement. Just a shared name. You will attend public events with me, and I will ensure your debts are cleared, your family is taken care of. You won't have to worry about anything." Mark listened carefully, his mind swirling. This was what he had agreed to. But hearing it out loud made it feel even more surreal. "And after the contract ends?" he asked, his voice low. "That depends on you, Mr. Davis," Eleanor replied coolly. "We can keep this arrangement as long as necessary, or we can end it when the time comes. But for now, let's focus on the present." The silence between them stretched, heavy with the unspoken understanding of what they had both agreed to. Eleanor's eyes were sharp, focused. Mark could sense her calculating, every move measured, every word chosen with precision. "So, what now?" Mark asked, trying to shake off the unease that lingered. Eleanor's lips curled into a slight smile. "Now, we proceed with the formalities. I've already arranged for the marriage to take place next week. It will be a simple ceremony, no fuss. You'll sign the final paperwork, and then we can both move on with our lives." Mark felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. A wedding. A wedding that was nothing more than paperwork. He had never imagined his life would come to this, marrying a woman for nothing more than a financial arrangement. But he also knew he had no choice. This was his only option. "Understood," he said, his voice steady. He stood up, adjusting his suit. "I'll do whatever it takes." Eleanor gave him a small nod, the corners of her lips lifting. "Good. Let's get this over with." As Mark left the study, he couldn't help but wonder, could he really keep his emotions out of this? Could he live in a world where everything was a transaction? Only time would tell. But for now, he had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The day of the wedding arrived faster than Mark could have imagined. He stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt for the third time. The suit was perfectly tailored, and the black tie felt like a symbol of everything he was about to do. His reflection stared back at him, but he barely recognized the man in the mirror. A few weeks ago, he was just a law student trying to keep his head above water. Now, he was about to marry a woman he barely knew, in a wedding that meant nothing more than a business arrangement. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to shake off the nervous tension that had been building in his chest. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he glanced at it quickly. It was a message from Eleanor's assistant, confirming the time and place for the ceremony. He stared at the text for a moment before locking his phone again. This was it. No turning back. As he arrived at the venue, a grand hotel ballroom that was as cold and pristine as the life he was about to step into, Mark's nerves were at an all-time high. The staff greeted him with polite smiles and ushered him to a small dressing room behind the stage. It was quiet in here, the kind of silence that made his heart race even faster. He sat down in the corner, looking at the well-worn shoes on his feet. They didn't feel like his anymore. Everything about today felt like someone else's life. He was about to marry Eleanor Brooks, the woman who had offered him a way out, and in doing so, he had entered a world that wasn't his. The rich and powerful. The kind of world he had only seen from a distance. As he stared at his shoes, the door opened, and Eleanor stepped in. She was already dressed in her wedding gown, the fabric shimmering in the soft light of the room. It was a simple gown, elegant but not too extravagant, just like everything about her. She was calm, composed, as always. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice cool but with a slight hint of curiosity. Mark nodded, though his throat felt dry. "I guess so." Eleanor smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She stepped closer to him, looking him over for a moment before speaking again. "I know this may seem strange," she said softly, "but we'll get through this. Just remember why we're doing this, and it will be over soon enough." Mark didn't respond. He couldn't find the words. What could he say? This wasn't how he imagined his life would turn out. He had thought he would be a successful lawyer, living a life he could be proud of. But here he was, about to marry a stranger for the sake of his family's survival. Eleanor was right, though. He had no choice. And as much as it bothered him, he had already signed the papers. He had already made this decision. "Shall we?" Eleanor asked, extending her arm to him. Mark hesitated for a moment before standing up. He could feel his palms sweat as he took her arm. The door opened, and they stepped out into the bright lights of the ballroom. The guests were already gathered, all watching them as they walked down the aisle. It felt like a dream, one he couldn't wake up from. The aisle stretched out before him, and the eyes of strangers burned into his back. Eleanor walked with confidence beside him, her head held high, as though this was the most natural thing in the world. He felt like a pawn in her carefully crafted game. As they reached the altar, Mark's heart pounded in his chest. The officiant greeted them, his voice echoing in the large room. He spoke of marriage, of vows, but Mark could hardly focus on the words. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by everything that had led up to this moment. Was this what his life had come to? A contract. A piece of paper. That was all this was supposed to be. He had convinced himself of it. And yet, as he looked at Eleanor, standing beside him in her wedding gown, he couldn't deny the twinge of something deeper inside him. What was it? Was it regret? Longing? Or was it just the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders? The officiant asked them to exchange vows, and Mark was suddenly pulled back into the moment. His eyes met Eleanor's, and for the first time since they had met, he saw something different in her gaze. It wasn't the cold, calculating look she had worn the first time they met. There was something vulnerable there, something that reminded him of the woman beneath the facade. But before he could process it, the moment passed. Eleanor spoke her vows, her voice steady, as though this was just another day in her carefully controlled life. Then, it was his turn. He cleared his throat, trying to find the words. I, Mark Davis, take you, Eleanor Brooks, to be my wife. For better or for worse. But even as he said the words, something shifted inside him. This wasn't just a contract. It couldn't be. Maybe this was his chance to start over. Maybe, just maybe, he could find something real here. But he wouldn't know for sure until the papers were signed and the vows exchanged. He could only hope that this decision would lead him to a better life, even if it was a life he never expected. With the vows said, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Mark didn't know whether to feel relief or something else. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, he saw her as more than just a business arrangement. She was a woman, and despite everything, he couldn't help but wonder what their future together would hold. The days following the wedding felt like a blur to Mark. He had never imagined that his life would change so quickly, but now, he was living in a world that was both alien and strangely exhilarating. Eleanor's mansion became his new home, a place of cold, polished floors and grand rooms, each one meticulously decorated with art and antiques. He still couldn't quite believe he was here, a far cry from the small apartment he had just days before. The first night after the wedding, he had slept in a guest room that felt more like a luxury suite than a place to rest. The silence of the house was overwhelming, and Mark lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had become of his life. Eleanor had said their marriage was a business arrangement, and that's all it was meant to be. But as the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing, not just for him, but for her too. One evening, as he was reading in the living room, the doorbell rang. Eleanor was in her study, and Mark had been left alone in the house, enjoying the rare peace. The doorbell rang again, pulling him from his thoughts. He made his way to the door, opening it to find a delivery man with a large bouquet of roses. He took the flowers with a polite thank you, setting them aside in the hallway. As he was about to return to his seat, he heard Eleanor's voice calling out to him from the stairs. Mark, come here for a moment, she said, her tone slightly different than usual. He hesitated, then walked towards her office, unsure of what she wanted. When he entered, he found her standing by the window, her gaze fixed on the sprawling gardens outside. The soft light of the setting sun cast a golden glow on her features, and for the first time, Mark noticed the weariness in her eyes. It was a subtle change, but it was there, like the mask she wore had slipped for just a moment. Is everything okay? Mark asked, his voice careful. Eleanor turned to him, her expression guarded but with a hint of vulnerability that he hadn't seen before. It's just, the flowers, she said softly. They remind me of someone from my past. Someone I would rather not think about right now. Mark's curiosity piqued, but he didn't press her for more. Eleanor had always kept her past private, never sharing much about her life before their arrangement. He had never asked her about it, but tonight, there was something in her voice that made him want to understand her better. I'm sorry, Mark said, stepping closer. I didn't mean to bring up anything bad. Eleanor shook her head, dismissing the apology with a wave of her hand. No, it's not your fault, she said, her voice steadier now. I've been thinking about how much has changed. How much I've changed. I know you agreed to this arrangement, but I'm beginning to wonder if it's enough. For both of us. Her words hung in the air, and Mark could feel the tension between them. The weight of their agreement, the cold distance that had defined their relationship, seemed to be shifting. Eleanor wasn't just questioning the arrangement, she was questioning herself, and that, Mark realized, was something he hadn't expected. He thought he was the only one struggling with their situation, but now he understood that she too was feeling the strain. Mark didn't know what to say. This was uncharted territory for him. His mind raced, trying to come up with the right words, but all he could do was stand there, watching her. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice quieter, almost to herself. Maybe this wasn't the right way, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Maybe I've spent so long trying to control everything, I forgot what it's like to just feel something. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time she had opened up to him like this, the first time he saw her as something more than the cold, businesswoman he had met. She was a woman, a person with her own struggles and desires, just like him. And for a brief moment, Mark wondered if this arrangement was more than just a transaction. Maybe it was an opportunity for both of them to find something real. He stepped forward, his voice calm but uncertain. Eleanor, I don't know where this is going either. But maybe we can figure it out. Together. She looked at him, and for the first time, Mark saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something soft, something human. Together, she echoed, her lips curling into a small, reluctant smile. For a moment, there was silence between them, but it was different this time. The walls that had been between them seemed a little thinner, and Mark felt a small sense of hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: they were no longer just two people bound by a contract. Something was changing, something neither of them expected. And for the first time in a long while, Mark felt a glimmer of possibility. The following days were filled with a strange sense of quiet. Mark had begun to settle into his new life at Eleanor's mansion, but something had shifted between them. There was no longer an overwhelming sense of business, no cold walls of formality between them. Instead, they shared small moments, silent meals in the grand dining room, long walks around the estate, and late-night conversations that felt more like companionship than obligation. Mark still wasn't sure what this arrangement had become, but every day, Eleanor's presence seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. She was no longer just his wife in name. She was becoming someone he could talk to, someone who could make him laugh even when he thought his life was falling apart. For the first time in weeks, Mark began to feel like there might be a way forward, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. It was a Friday evening when everything changed. Eleanor had invited him to a charity event, a gala she had been preparing for weeks. Mark had been to parties before, but this felt different. This wasn't just another event in her busy schedule, it was something important to her, something she cared about. As they arrived at the venue, a lavish hotel ballroom, Mark couldn't help but notice how different things felt now. He no longer felt like an outsider. Eleanor, dressed in a stunning red gown, led him through the crowd, introducing him to guests and making him feel at ease in a world that once seemed foreign to him. It was as if she had pulled him into her life, and for the first time, he found himself not just playing a part, but living it. As they mingled with the guests, Mark noticed Eleanor seemed more relaxed than he had ever seen her. She laughed, exchanged stories with old friends, and even playfully teased him about his awkwardness in social settings. It was a side of her he had never seen before, the part of her that wasn't just a powerful CEO or a woman with a carefully constructed facade. She was human, vulnerable, and that made Mark realize just how much he had misunderstood her before. Later in the evening, as the event came to a close, Eleanor stepped away to handle a few last-minute details. Mark found himself standing alone, watching the guests slowly trickle out. He was about to turn back to the exit when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find a familiar face, a woman from the event, someone Eleanor had introduced him to earlier. She smiled warmly, her eyes glinting with a knowing look. "Mark, right?" she asked, her voice smooth. "I couldn't help but notice how well you and Eleanor are getting along. You two make quite the pair." Mark felt a blush creeping up his neck. He wasn't used to being complimented on his relationship, especially not in such a public way. But he managed to smile, unsure of how to respond. "Thanks," he said, glancing around for Eleanor. It's been good." The woman chuckled softly. "Good? It looks like more than that. You're lucky, you know." Mark frowned, not understanding what she meant. Before he could ask, she leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "Eleanor is one of the most powerful women I know. And yet, she has a way of making everyone around her feel special. She's not just cold businesswoman, Mark. She's someone who wants to be loved, too." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't realized how much he had begun to see Eleanor differently. Sure, they had shared moments of kindness, but hearing someone else say it's someone who knew her better than he did made him pause. Had she been hiding something all along? Was this arrangement really just a contract, or was there more to it? Before he could respond, the woman smiled again, standing up straight. "Just remember, not everyone gets the chance to be close to her. Don't take it for granted." With that, she walked away, leaving Mark standing there, lost in thought. He stared after her for a long moment, the words echoing in his mind. Eleanor had shown him a side of herself he hadn't expected. But now, hearing someone else speak about her like this, he began to wonder if maybe just maybe there was something more between them. Was this really just a business arrangement, or had they both been fooling themselves all along? The drive back to the mansion was quiet, with only the soft hum of the car engine to fill the space between them. Mark sat in the back seat, his mind racing with thoughts of Eleanor. When they arrived, he was about to get out of the car when Eleanor reached over, gently resting her hand on his arm. "Mark," she said softly, her voice unexpectedly vulnerable. "I know things aren't perfect. I know this wasn't what we planned. But I'm starting to think we might have something real here. Not just a contract, something more." For the first time since they met, Mark looked at her and saw her as more than just the woman who had saved him from financial ruin. She wasn't just Eleanor Brooks, the CEO. She was Eleanor, the woman who had made him laugh, who had shown him a kindness he hadn't expected. And in that moment, Mark realized that maybe just maybe he had fallen for her. "Maybe we do," he whispered back, his heart racing in a way he hadn't expected. "Maybe we do." The next few weeks felt like a blur to Mark. Everything had changed so quickly, and yet, somehow, he felt like he was still trying to catch up. He had moved from a small apartment with chipped paint and cracked windows to the grandeur of Eleanor's mansion. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He had started to feel something he hadn't expected, something deeper than the business arrangement they had made. Eleanor had opened up to him in ways that made him see her not just as a businesswoman or a stranger, but as a person, with her own struggles, her own vulnerabilities. He had begun to look forward to their evenings together, quiet dinners, long walks in the garden, and even the moments when they sat in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. And yet, despite everything, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Was this real? Was he truly falling for her, or was he just getting lost in the idea of it all? One evening, as they sat together in the study, Eleanor spoke up, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her eyes focused on the papers in front of her. Mark looked up from his book, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He set it aside, his attention immediately on her. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. Eleanor hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about our situation," she began, her words slow and deliberate. "This arrangement. It's been more than I expected. More than I thought it would be. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But I need to know if you're feeling the same way. I need to know if this is more than just what we agreed upon." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to find the truth in his expression. Mark felt his heart race. He had been waiting for this moment, in a way, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon. He had been wondering how much longer they could keep pretending that this was just a contract, a deal between two people who barely knew each other. And now, here she was, asking the question he had been avoiding. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Eleanor," he started, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what's happening between us. But I know I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect to feel the way I do. I didn't expect to care about you like this." His words came out in a rush, and he found himself almost out of breath by the time he finished. Eleanor remained silent for a moment, her eyes softening as she took in his words. She didn't say anything at first, and Mark wondered if he had said too much, if he had ruined the fragile balance they had built. But then she spoke, her voice quiet. "I never meant for this to happen," she said softly. "I never wanted to fall for you. I thought this was just business. But now I'm not so sure anymore. I don't know what this is between us, Mark. But I can't keep pretending that it's nothing. I can't pretend that it doesn't mean something to me." She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I don't know what we're supposed to do about it. But I can't ignore it anymore. I can't keep hiding it." Mark's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, Eleanor was being vulnerable with him. She was letting down her guard, showing him the part of her that she had kept hidden for so long. And in that moment, Mark realized that he wasn't the only one struggling with their arrangement. She was, too. This wasn't just a one-sided thing. They were both feeling it. They were both in this together. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We don't have to figure it out all at once," he said softly. "We can take it one step at a time. But I'm not going to walk away from this. I'm not going to pretend that this doesn't matter." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. For the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She squeezed his hand back, a silent understanding passing between them. They didn't have all the answers yet. They didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a business deal anymore. It felt like something real. And maybe that was all they needed. As they sat together in silence, the weight of the conversation still lingering in the air, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever happened next, he knew that they would figure it out together. For the first time since this whole journey began, Mark felt like he had found something worth holding on to. As the weeks went by, Mark found himself becoming more and more attached to Eleanor. They spent more time together, not just in the grand spaces of her mansion, but in the quiet moments that felt more like real life than a carefully constructed contract. They would sit together by the fireplace, exchanging stories, or take long walks in the sprawling gardens behind the house, where the roses bloomed in a riot of colors. There was a comfort between them now, something that wasn't just built on duty or obligation. It was something deeper. For the first time in months, Mark felt like he was starting to understand what real companionship meant. But despite these changes, there was still a lingering question that he couldn't shake. What was this, really? Was it love? Was it just convenience? And how would it all end? One evening, after dinner, Eleanor and Mark found themselves in the library, each with a glass of wine in hand. The soft crackle of the fire was the only sound in the room. Eleanor was the first to break the silence. "Mark," she began, her voice quiet, "I've been thinking a lot about this, about us. I don't know if I'm ready to say it out loud yet, but I can't pretend anymore. What we've started, it's not just a business arrangement to me anymore. It hasn't been for a while." She paused, searching his face for a reaction. Mark felt his chest tighten. She was admitting something he hadn't dared to admit to himself yet. She was feeling what he had been feeling, something that couldn't be explained in terms of a contract. He set his glass down, his hand trembling slightly. "Eleanor," he trailed off, unsure of what to say. His mind raced, trying to keep up with the reality of the moment. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? Was this real? I know this wasn't how we planned it, she continued, her voice soft, but I don't think I can go on pretending that it's just a contract. I feel like I've been hiding behind this facade, but you're not just my husband in name anymore, Mark. You've become someone I care about. More than I expected, more than I ever wanted to admit to myself. And I need to know where we go from here. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. He had been trying to make sense of everything too. For so long, it had been easier to think of their relationship as nothing more than a business deal, but now, with Eleanor's confession, he couldn't deny that things had changed. He had changed. I feel the same way, he said finally, his voice steady. I didn't expect any of this either. When we first met, I thought it was just about getting my debts paid off, about surviving. But now I can't ignore what's happening between us. I don't know what this is, Eleanor. But I don't want to walk away from it. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, it felt like everything was hanging in the air, waiting for a decision to be made. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite place: uncertainty, hope, maybe even fear. She had been alone for so long, and now she was letting herself feel something for someone else. It was terrifying, but it was real. So what does that mean for us? She asked softly. Mark stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet night. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but all he could see was the reflection of himself and Eleanor in the glass. He didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, he realized that he didn't need to. They didn't have to figure everything out right away. What mattered was that they were both willing to try. Turning back to her, he smiled softly. I don't know where this is going, Eleanor. But I'm willing to find out. I'm willing to take this one step at a time. Together. She smiled back, a genuine, soft smile that made his heart skip a beat. For the first time since they had met, Mark felt like he was not just living through this arrangement, but living in a truly living. And for the first time, he felt like he had a future with her. It wasn't clear, and it wasn't perfect, but it was something real, and that was enough. As they stood there, the world outside seemed to fade away. In that moment, they both understood that whatever came next, they would face it together. Days passed, and Mark and Eleanor's relationship deepened. What had started as a contract, a business arrangement, had slowly evolved into something neither of them had expected. They spent more time together outside the confines of their roles as husband and wife. They talked about everything, about their pasts, their fears, their dreams. Eleanor had begun to open up in ways Mark hadn't anticipated. She shared stories of her childhood, the hardships she had faced before building her empire, and how her success had come at the cost of her personal life. Mark listened, truly listened, and found himself connecting with her in ways he hadn't thought possible. But there was one thing that still hung over them both: the unspoken truth that their marriage, though real in some ways, had started out as a lie. Neither of them had wanted to confront it, but it was there, waiting to be addressed. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Eleanor turned to Mark with a serious look in her eyes. Mark, she began, her voice quiet but firm, we need to talk about the future. About what we've been building, means. I know we've both been avoiding it, but I can't keep pretending we don't have to face it. She paused, as if weighing her words carefully. I never intended for us to get so close. But now, I feel like I can't ignore it anymore. I need to know where we stand. I need to know if this is something we're both in for, or if we're just going through the motions. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it now, at this moment, made everything feel so real. Mark looked at Eleanor, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had been struggling with his own feelings, not fully understanding what had changed between them. What had started as an arrangement, a way out of his debt, had grown into something more. He couldn't deny it any longer. He had fallen for her. He had fallen for the woman who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, but who had become the person he now trusted more than anyone. Eleanor, he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling in his chest. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect any of it. But I can't ignore how I feel anymore. I care about you more than I ever thought possible. And I don't want to pretend that what we have is just a contract. It's not just that anymore. It's real. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I want to be a part of it. With you. He looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts before meeting her gaze again. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. But I'm willing to try. I want to try. I want to see where this goes. Together. There was silence between them for a moment, and then Eleanor's face softened, her eyes glistening with something that looked like relief. She reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. Mark, I didn't know if you felt the same way, she said, her voice full of emotion. I've been so focused on the business side of everything, I didn't want to admit to myself that this. She paused, taking a breath before continuing. This could be something more. But now, hearing you say that, it feels like we can finally take this step forward. Together. She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and Mark felt his heart swell. He had been afraid to admit it, but now that she had said it, it felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could truly move forward, not just with Eleanor as his wife, but with Eleanor as someone he truly cared for. They sat in silence for a while, just holding each other's hands, the night air cool around them. The city seemed to disappear as they sat there, and in that moment, Mark knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time since this all began, he felt like they were on the same page. They had built something real, something that could weather any storm. And as they sat there, watching the stars above, Mark realized that sometimes, the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Months passed, and what had once been a calculated, business-driven marriage had blossomed into something neither Mark nor Eleanor had anticipated. Their connection deepened with each passing day, no longer bound by a contract but by real affection and mutual respect. They had shared so many moments together, quiet mornings, spontaneous laughter, and deep conversations that lasted late into the night. Mark no longer felt like the outsider he had been when they first met. He had found a place within Eleanor's world, but more importantly, he had found a place in her heart. It was a slow, steady growth, one that didn't need to be rushed. Their marriage had started with practicalities, but now it was rooted in something much more significant. They had both shed their doubts, their fears, and the weight of their pasts. They were no longer living in a world where everything had a price. Now, they were just two people, choosing each other every day. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city's skyline, Eleanor turned to Mark with a thoughtful look on her face. Mark, she began, her voice calm yet filled with emotion, I've been thinking about how far we've come. From where we started, from where I was before this. I never imagined I could feel like this. And I want to make sure we're not just letting this go by without acknowledging it. Mark looked at her, his heart full. I know exactly what you mean, he replied. I didn't know what to expect when we first got married. But now. I can't imagine my life without you. You've changed everything for me, Eleanor. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening with warmth. And you've changed everything for me too, she said softly, her hand gently resting in his. They were both silent for a moment, watching the city lights below them flicker. It felt like the whole world was at peace, as if everything had fallen into place. There was no more uncertainty between them. They had built something real, something lasting. And in that quiet moment, Eleanor knew that their journey had only just begun. They still had challenges ahead, they still had questions to answer, but they had each other. And that, more than anything, made all the difference. As Mark looked at Eleanor, he realized that sometimes, the best things in life don't come from grand plans or calculated moves. Sometimes, they come from the simple choice to be open, to let go of fear, and to trust that love will find its way. This was their story, a story of unexpected beginnings, of two people who had taken a leap of faith and found something far greater than they could have imagined. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was theirs. And that was enough.